This is TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick. We're here at the SDN NFV World Congress in The Hague in the Netherlands, and I'm talking with Andrew Coward, the CEO of Lumina Networks. Andrew, great to see you.
You too, Martin.
Once more. It's 2 years now since Lumina sprang into being, as it were, in Silicon Valley. I want to catch up with you on what's happened with the company since then. And I know much of what you do is predicated on open source. How has the open source side of the business progressed to begin with?
Yeah, so I mean, we've started with OpenDaylight, and we use other projects as well. OpenDaylight's been the thing that we've really championed and driven. Back in the Brocade days, we were the first to commercialize it and deliver it. And as we came out as Lumina, we had the backing of AT&T and Verizon, both as customers and then later as investors. So that's really kind of driven us. I think from an open source perspective, the OpenDaylight project, frankly, hasn't seemed to be as exciting as it was, 3 years ago. The kind of hype cycle, if you like, has died down from that. So the reality of deploying OpenDaylight has been a lot of the drudgery, if you like, of making it scale, making it secure, making it so that everything works at the vast carrier-grade requirements that they're required. So in that time frame, it has really moved into something that's highly deployable, highly usable at tens and hundreds of thousands of devices, and that's been the shift, if you like. So it doesn't sound as exciting as dumping 1 million lines of new code into it or changing it massively. It's really been this progress that's been made to the steady state that we have today. That I think is incredibly impressive as a community that we've got to this point.
The point is, of course, that we've seen it many times in the industry where you have lots of enthusiasm and hype at the beginning indeed, and then a project takes shape, and as you say, millions of lines of code are done, and then it underlies everything. Then you have to make the whole thing work together. Yeah. And there's no big announcements, it's just a steady progression, and that's where you're at.
And that's what we've seen, and that was the slope of enlightenment, I think, that Gartner called about.
Yeah.
Talk about
another one of your Zen pronouncements.
Well, I think that was Gartner, but yes.
It was Gartner, you're quite right. Still sounds very Zen though. Thank you. What have your customers' reactions have been to Lumina as a company and your commitment to open source? I
think we truly are seen as a flag waver for OpenDaylight, particularly by everybody here at this show. Now for us, though, obviously we had early success with North America and what we've done there. It's taken longer than probably we predicted. Well, certainly I predicted from my original business plan as to how quickly the take-up would happen here in Europe and in Asia too. And now we're seeing that take place, both in the really large carriers here in Europe and also some of the smaller folks who, it's really interesting. I didn't have to sell anybody as we go and meet customers on the value of open source. Everybody gets that. I don't have to compete openly with other projects about what we do. It's been more about finding the thing that needs to go first, the project, the pain point, if you like, and delivering that SDN control to work with the existing network. So we're not talking about changing hardware, changing infrastructure, making that all work in an automated way. So that digital transformation journey that so many telcos and service providers have been on is only now coming to kind of where the rubber hits the road and they say, okay, now we have to move to deployment, now we have to get this. Yeah, and there's been other projects too. I mean, so ONAP, for example, has become massively important in the OpenDaylight world and in the telco world at large. But kind of sorting through that and saying, these are the components I actually need out of ONAP to make my network work. So I don't have to take all of this big lump. How do I do that? How do I make that happen and get to solve this one business problem that I want to solve first? And that's been the thing that we've now got through in the market here. That, as I say, took a bit longer than we really expected.
Let's talk about the markets very briefly. You're headquartered on the west coast of the US. Obviously, your market initially, as you mentioned with AT&T and so on, is within the United States. But you're looking to Europe, you're looking to the Far East. Can you determine, are there market differences? Are customers in the States, in Europe and in Asia looking for different things from Lumina, or is it basically they're looking for the same thing?
Everybody has the same challenge, which is that they need to drive automation, and they've realized quickly that they need to abstract to do that, meaning the business logic has to be separate from the device logic. Or to put another way, I need to be able to swap one vendor out with another without re-engineering my business. Sure. And that's what OpenDaylight delivers in spades, right? So that requirement's no different in Japan than it is in Germany than it is in the US. That's a kind of fundamental. Now, where those pain points lie, particularly, or what goes first, has actually shifted over a couple of years. Now, we thought when we started it would all be about IP and routing would go first. It's turned out that the pain points have been more in the optical space. And that's been really interesting. Now, perhaps if we thought a bit more through, it would have been more obvious. But if you think about it, the optical world didn't have common routing protocols, for example. But it did have very vertically integrated management systems. So once you were locked into a management system, it was hard to then use that management system to control something else. Even ostensibly with more open architectures, if not open software, that some of these vendors came up with. So that's become one of the biggest challenges for carriers, because they want to be able to have commonality, among how they control the optical network. So that's been one particular thing. And then it really comes down to the holistic. I need to be able to manage the optical network and the IP network and the CPU devices and the MPLS world and SD-WAN. And I need to bring all that together so that I'm not building separate systems. And so, as an example, SD-WAN has been this huge thing. There's billions of dollars of market share in that and all this focus. Yet that's yet another thing to manage on top of all the other things we just described. And so bringing those things into the framework of automation. So yeah, you can manage SD-WAN. It's just the final step you do when you've done the other 5 different domains that you need to touch. So that kind of journey people have gone through. And again, I don't see differences, with customers around the world on that. Just everybody's in a different place. And as I said, the US just happened to go first with this. And I think primarily because of the AT&T leadership. Originally, Domain 2.0 led the way, the push for ONAP, and everybody else has seen that and then obviously seen the results of that. And that's everybody piling on now, right?
Thanks, Andrew. Final question to you. Again, looking at Lumina, you're 2 years in. You've just said during the course of this chat that if you'd known the way things were going to pan out, you might have done things somewhat differently. Nobody can see what's coming around the corner, obviously, but what are the implications for you from what you've been saying? Where do you find yourself now, given you're customer-driven and open source driven? What are the implications for you for the next year, 2 years? Where's Lumina going?
Right. Well, I mean, we find ourselves in this sweet spot, really, of being pretty much the only vendor that is kind of, I'd describe us as a bit like Switzerland. So everybody is happy working with us because we don't have an axe to grind. We're not selling data plane. We're not trying to create a vertically integrated system. And so from that perspective, it seems, and just kind of going around the show, everybody's very happy that we exist. And regard us as having a really important role. All we have to do is transfer that opportunity into real projects and real deployments. And that's the work that's taking place now that gets us to, really, in my mind, and from a business model perspective, the success that Red Hat had with Linux. And I see a massive number of parallels in their model and what they did and the world that we live in, right? In their world, because applications could be ported onto Linux really easily because of things like POSIX. That was critical. For us, it's because all the vendors have been told you have to use netconf, you have to have Yang models. That's becoming the opening factor that then OpenDaylight takes advantage of, and we deliver in commercial distribution and say that Red Hat did with Linux does. So from that perspective, we're right at that great point. And as I say, because of the journey points that the carriers are in and saying, I have to do this now, I've been talking about it for a long time, and this goes first. I'm going to do this with my optical network, I'm going to do this with my IP network, I'm going to make that. That's the transition, and that's what we'll take advantage of, and I think we're perfectly placed to do that.
Well, I hope we meet before 2 years is up. I mean, I can ask you the next set of questions. But until then, anyway, Andrew Coward, thanks very much indeed.
Thanks, Martin.